This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, the subject is the Nazz, a 1960s rock band from Philadelphia. I'll be talking with two of its founding members, and the conversation will begin in a moment. This is Dan Schneider. I am speaking with two of the founding members of the 1960s American rock band, the Nazz, Thom Mooney, the drummer for the band, and Stewkey Antoni, the lead singer. Anyone who's watching my site or my YouTube channel knows a few weeks ago I did a show about the band with two rock journalists, and now I have two of the members. So I guess this will be the other half. They're the people who covered people like you, and you're the people who lived it. So thank you for both joining me. As I said in the first show, I just stumbled upon the band accidentally. I remember as a kid being 3 or 4 years old. I was born in '65, and I remember the song "Open My Eyes," and it was really catchy, groovy song. It was very dense musical. Even as a child, I recognized it was a good song. And then, you know, things go on, and I'd never heard anything. I didn't even remember who the band was. And then I watched a YouTube video. I guess it was on a playlist, and all of a sudden the song came on. I said, I know that fucking song. It's been like 54 years or something since I heard it. I said, who the hell is that? And I said, the Nazz. And then I said, Todd Rundgren was in a band before Utopian One. I didn't know any of that. And he was the only name that I knew. But then I started listening to it, and I listened to the first album, which I thought was very good. And then I listened to the second album, which I said in the earlier show I thought was really just a masterpiece. So without further fawning, do either of you want to start with just an opening statement? Stewkey.
Go ahead, Tom. Oh, me? You want me to say?
Yeah.
Thank you, first of all, for inviting us to participate and talk about the band. I appreciate that, Dan. Yeah. And hi, Tom. How are you?
You know.
Listen, I enjoyed probably, you know, all of the time that Nazz was together, the good times and the bad times. Even the bad times weren't so bad. It was just frustrating, I think, that things got out of hand. And, you know, you don't always know people when you first get with them, especially playing music, you know. And at first there was a camaraderie among us that faded by the second album. But it was a hell of an experience in the short time we were together.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I wanted to interview you too is I think you guys were a great band. I mean, if you look at people who've only had 2, or if you want to consider 3 albums, the third album, you know, there were a lot of bands that, you know, just had 1 or 2 or 3 albums in the '60s or '70s. But if I just look at the number of terrific songs, and we'll go through some of them later, you guys have got to be in the top 3 or 4 of those bands that weren't at the, you know, Beatles, Led Zeppelin level, you know, but it, you know, people would say, oh, I remember them. But and you know, I think that Stewkey, you were a terrific lead singer, and Thom, one of the things that when I first heard "Open My Eyes" again, and then listened to some of the other songs, especially on the second album, was you have a really furious kind of drumming style. And so let me just ask you, who was your influence growing up drumming? Because, you know, everyone will say, who is the guy? Oh God, it's just named. Had the name. Buddy Rich had that furious kind of style. And when I was watching some other videos in that very video sequence that I found you guys again, I saw Carmen Appice from the Vanilla Fudge. There's a song called Machine Gun where he's just blasting away. So who were some of your influences, Thom, as a drummer?
I didn't really even think about playing drums till I was in college. Yeah. But as a youngster, my family moved a lot, and several different times we lived in Atlantic City, New Jersey. and I worked on the steel pier as an apprentice glassblower. And I used to go to all the shows there. There was a big ballroom out at the out in the ocean end of the pier, about a half mile out, and quarter of a mile out. And I saw, boy, I mean, I saw Gene Krupa play there. I saw people like that. I always liked Krupa because he had that kind of almost like tribal kind of drum playing that he would always go off on, or start, or hold a song together with, just that tom playing. So that was pretty influential. And then I got into rock music. I saw many of the bands from the British invasion, including the wimpy ones like Herman's Hermits and Freddie and the Dreamers. But I mean, I saw the Rolling Stones on the steel pier in Atlantic City. I have some pictures of it. I've seen some pictures of the audience. I keep trying to find myself, but I can't do it. I don't know, influences. I just was kind of a wild man. And when we were doing Nazz albums, I'd only been playing less than 2 years. And I was just taking advantage of the fact that I think that the freedom that I had when we got into Nazz to, we were basically 3-piece. We had keyboard in it, but that was mostly just for pads and just sort of a drone in the background. But yeah, I was free to do anything, and I just took advantage of it. Youth. I mean, I was 19 when we met. When we did those records, I was 20. So
let me just start with you then, since you briefly mentioned your background. Where did you grow up? Was there a main town that you grew up in? Did you come from an artistic or a musical family, Thom?
No. My hometown is Altoona, Pennsylvania. It's in the West.
Yeah.
And but my mother was a nomad, sort of looking for the end of some rainbow. So she was married 5 times. I went to 17 schools before I finished college. But we always ended up back after, living somewhere else. We always ended up back in Altoona or Philadelphia or Johnstown or Pittsburgh or Cleveland, or I lived in all those cities and went to schools in every one. I only went to one college. I went to Penn State. So that's pretty much it. But Altoona I still consider it my hometown. I still go online and look at pictures of it once in a while and think, I got to go visit. Yeah. And I have a brother who lives in Harrisburg.
So, Thom, when you were young, you guys were all born in the late 40s. So you hit your teen years right around 1960. So were you a little looking past someone like Elvis? Was an Elvis Presley or Little Richard, were they people that you listened to, Thom? Or were you already, I don't know, were the Beach Boys even starting around 1960? I don't know who would have been Buddy Holly, I guess. Who were you listening to?
I was listening, it wasn't a musical family, although with the Irish American heritage, we always had a piano, even though nobody played it. In school, back then, in the school districts I was in, music was generally a mandatory study. So or orchestra or band, something like that. They tried me out on every section of the band, and the brass would send me to the woodwinds, and the woodwinds would send me to the piano, and nobody ever sent me to percussion. So I had no education, and I sort of just I used to live, even though the winters would be really cold and freezing. I took a room in the attic of our house where the heat never reached. But I only did that because I could get Pittsburgh radio all night long, and I'd lay up there with a little transistor
Mm.
and just listen to hits on I don't know what it was, KDKA or one of those stations in Pittsburgh. And first live show I ever saw was, I think it was Frankie Avalon. We were visiting somebody in Cleveland, my aunt, and they took us kids to see a show with Frankie Avalon.
Yeah.
But after that, I just discovered the British bands coming in. I loved the Ventures.
Mm.
There used to be bands.
Now the Ventures were those ones that had that song that it sounded like were they the ones that had that? I forget the name of the song, but it had that they were playing the same riff over and over again. There was a famous song. Was that the Ventures, or am I thinking of someone else?
I'm not sure. The song I most remember at this point is "Walk Don't Run."
Okay.
From which, if you really listen to it, you can see where Todd actually lifted his opening to "Open My Eyes," or his the line da 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 da. Listen to "Walk Don't Run." It's the theme of that song.
Mm.
So it's altered. Well, I don't want to get ahead of the conversation, but when we put together "Open My Eyes," we were just trying to lift stuff from wherever we could to make something that would get played on the radio.
Yeah. Well, I've often said to people, you never want to plagiarize, but stealing is fine. You don't want to do the exact same thing, but you take something and you put it in a different context. And music, even more so than poetry or writing or painting, is open to that. I mean, there's only a limited amount of riffs that you really can have. It's how you put them together.
I think I was always proud of my influences, so I wanted to be identified with what I liked. I didn't want to. I was never looking to break down any barriers.
So let me turn to you, Stewkey. What was your family like, and where did you grow up? Were they musical, artistically inclined, intellectuals, working class? Were you also from Pennsylvania?
No, I grew up in the Navy with my dad. Lived in a bunch of places until we settled in Newport, Rhode Island. I guess I was, in the 7th grade. And the only one that was really musical in my family was my mother. She played the piano and the ukulele, and she sang. She would like to sing with big bands, so she would sing at the Officers Club or the Enlisted Man's Club or any club that would have her. I'd be honest with you. Mm-hmm. And she had a real belting voice, basically like I do, I guess. Mm-hmm. But my musical influences were basically singing Irish songs when the families would get together, and my mother was the oldest of 10 kids, so there was big family reunions all the time, big Christmases, and we all sang, and I sang as much as I could. I enjoyed it. So my musical influences, I liked to dance as a kid. So I would dance to all the hit records at the time. I aspired to be a ball player when I was a kid, baseball player. Yeah. And I knew I needed high school. I knew I needed the discipline of a team and high school coaching to you know, get into college. I thought I could get a scholarship to a college and play ball, and then eventually make it to the majors. But I wasn't able to do that. I had to go. I went to a high school that didn't have that baseball program. So I guess around '64, I saw a clip on television, and it was the Beatles playing, and that was the opportunity that I needed. That was my space to get into, because I knew I wouldn't make it the other way. I knew my dream to be a ball player was kind of squashed, so I needed something else, and I knew that I could be a front man. I knew that I wasn't shy to do that. That's how I looked at it, and I thought I could sing. So it was what I pursued. I put my first band together, and then a second band, and playing clubs or mostly high school dances, stuff like that. But I would sit in my room at home with my ear up against a little teeny speaker, one of those small record players that played 45s. Yeah. And I would just sit there and I would practice all the Beatle parts. I could get 45s. I couldn't get albums at the time in Newport. So I had all the 45s that I could get. And I just sang to every part. And eventually left and came to Philly in search. Well, I really wasn't even going to land here in Philadelphia. Our plans were to get to Florida and join a band down there right before spring break, because I came down here in February, right around this time. And my transportation broke down here in Philadelphia. So I joined a band.
So let me ask you, Antoni, you're Italian, I would presume?
No, I'm German and Irish.
Oh, okay, because I was going to say, back in the 50s, where, if you were Italian, you would have been Tony Bennett and Frank Sinatra, maybe Enrico Caruso. So I don't know if there were any German-American equivalents then. But you said you were singing along to all the parts. What? I'm sorry?
Who didn't, I mean, who from our era of beginning musicians didn't love everything? Elvis, Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, all those guys that actually had hit records. That was just the fuel that you said you liked to dance. I mean, that was the fuel that got everybody jumping around where I was, and all crowded around. Yeah, one guy had a car, and you just park it somewhere, and everybody'd stand around with the AM radio just blasting to get, we had one radio station in Altoona at that time. They played everything. You'd hear a Frank Sinatra song followed by, Jerry Lee Lewis, followed by the Beatles, followed by Nat King Cole, which is why you had to listen to Pittsburgh stations. But I mean, I think we all fueled off the same sort of driving rock and roll. When rock and roll really identified a specific thing, which it doesn't anymore.
So let me go. Did you say something? Okay. Thom, let me just ask, what were the first bands that you were in? Because I know that there's not a hell of a lot of information about the band compared to a lot of other bands from the 70s, 80s, etc. But Woody's Truck Stop was a band that apparently, I think Carson Van Osten, who was the bassist of the band, and Todd Rundgren came from. What bands were you in before you hooked up with the, Osten and Rundgren, Thom?
First off, Carson told me some stories about Woody's Truck Stop, and I'll tell you them later if it comes up. But I remember when I was just before I started college, after the school system had put me through every instrument, my mother helped me. I said, maybe I should play drums. So my mother went off and arranged for me to get a drum kit. I wish I had it. It was just so cool. It was an old Rogers Mardi Gras finish kit. Remember them, Stewkey? They're the ones I covered in plaid cloth.
Oh yeah. They're the black
And
ones.
so I had the drum kit, and I did one gig. It was a polka party at some kind of factory. I think it was a textile factory or something. And then my mother moved again, and I had just started college. And I just said, I can't do it anymore. I can't move again. I don't want to. This is too. So for as long as the rent was paid, I stayed in the apartment we'd been living in. And then I moved in with a friend of mine, a British family in Altoona. And a guy knocked on my door, and he said, "Hey, we heard you're a drummer. We need a drummer in our band." And that was the first band I actually played in. So that was called the Inmates. And we actually went on the road playing like I know we played Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, and we played a couple of other bases. Most of us weren't 21, so it was limited where we could go. But yeah, we did that, and then I actually left school for a term to go off on some of those road trips, and then went back to school. And I got involved with a couple of bands in school, but the one that introduced me to those guys was a folk rock band called the Munchkins. And we started doing gigs in the coffee houses in Philadelphia. So we would hitchhike. I would hitchhike to Philadelphia on weekends to do these gigs, carrying a floor tom under my arm while I hitchhiked. Somebody else would transport other parts of the drum kit, and I'd borrow what I could in Philadelphia. That's how it happened. That's how I got down there.
And how about
So
you?
I only had like 2 bands under me when I got into when we started Nazz.
Stewkey, how about you? What bands were you in before Nazz?
The first band I put together was a band called the Mods in Newport.
Very British.
Yeah. And of course, we all wanted to be British back then, or a British rock star anyway. But anyhow, second one was called Public Nuisance. And
You lived up to that.
that was a really good name for 1965, though, I had to say. And when I came to Philadelphia, I was in a band called Elizabeth, which was a folk rock band. And then I joined Nazz after that.
So before we talk about the few years that you were probably less than 2 years that the Nazz were formerly a band, I just want to get a few things straightened with the name, because there's a lot of information or misinformation. And if you saw the show that I did with the rock journalist fellows, they didn't know some of the answers. So let me just ask both of you. So Stewkey, it's said online a number of times that your nickname of Stewkey, because your real first name is Robert, was somehow a bizarro melding of trying to sound like Richard Starkey, Ringo Starr's real name. Is that how it came about? It was?
That's exactly how it came about. The band I was in, a band I told you about, the Mods, I mean, we were just kids. So we all wanted stage names, like, because Elvis had one, and then, single name star was appealing to us. So some of the other guys in the band would pick names like, Dude, but it wasn't really Dude. It was just obscure surnames. And I didn't want to pick just a regular name. I figured out, I just took Ringo's name, his last name, and just changed 2 letters. That's all, and called myself Stewkey. And it's more or less became permanent by the time I got to Philadelphia.
And Thom, I know that when I was a kid, you'd see more of the THOM version of Thom rather than TOM. The most famous being a shoe company called Thom McAn when I was a kid. But why did you keep the H? Was there any particular reason? Was it just more exotic looking, in the little beat magazines, the Tiger Beat and whatever?
I just grew up with it. My mother did it to me. And I actually, one of my first attempts at having a real job was at a Thom McAn shoe store. I failed miserably. Started off as a salesman, got demoted to stockroom, and then demoted out of it. But yeah, that was one of the only shoe stores in Altoona. So yeah, I know about that. But no, my mother did it to me, and I just never changed it. When I was trying to be Irish in my mid-40s, I mean, my family's Irish, but when I tried to live that lifestyle, I took an Irish form, which was TOMAS.
Oh, okay. So let's just talk about the name of the band. First off, is there a definite article? Because both of you have referred to it as Nazz, but then people talk of the Nazz, and as I mentioned in the earlier show with the journalist, that apparently the first name of the band, Alice Cooper, was the Nazz. So you guys were not aware of that band using the term Nazz, were you?
Not at all at the time.
We did find out, and because we had signed with a record company and they hadn't. It just took, I think the record company took care of that.
Okay.
Yeah, they did. But to
the best of my knowledge, that's because I heard there's another band in Los Angeles named Nazz, and then we signed our record deal, and suddenly they weren't Nazz anymore. That's all I know.
And is it? Do you guys, when you talk about, is it the Nazz? Because the albums just say Nazz. It's Nazz, and then it's Nazz. So, is there the definite article there? I mean, it's a minor point.
You're using.
I don't think any of us ever cared.
You're just using the in the sentence as a. When you talk about. You can use it both ways, but it's so easy just to say the Nazz in conversation. But if you wanted to describe the band as far as I thought, from what I understand, is that we preferred it just Nazz, or otherwise it would say it on the record.
Okay. So let's talk then about how you guys, the two of you, met and hooked up with Rundgren and Austin, because as I mentioned earlier, they were in a band called Woody's Truck Stop. And apparently, I guess Rundgren wanted to leave, and Austin went with him. So did they come and see you guys playing in one of your bands, or did you see them playing together in Woody's Truck Stop, or how did you two hook up with those two? Either one of you.
I can tell you my story, but
you hooked up with them before I did. You guys are already a band.
Yeah.
And you found out that Todd didn't want to sing because he really couldn't. So you needed a singer, and that's why you got a hold of me. That's what I understood.
Yeah. Woody's Truck Stop, this is what Carson told me. He was in Woody's Truck Stop, and then they needed I forget which guy they needed to replace. And that guy said he would come and join the band if they also took Todd into the band. This is while Carson was still in it. And so that's how Todd got into Woody's Truck Stop. And Carson quit soon after that. And then Todd sort of stayed on. I was playing a place called the Artist's Hut with the folk rock band in Philadelphia. And, you know, we'd go down there from school, and we were kids. And this is an era when you could pull into the center of town and say, who's got a place I can crash? And you'd get 25 offers for a living room floor or a couch or something. But so I remember I didn't know where I was going to stay that night. And we were playing that night, and it was really rotten weather. And I sucked as a drummer, so I was just hanging around the coffee house. It was in a basement, just playing drums, just to see if I could learn something. And Todd came walking out of the back room, and I honestly, I once said this in some form somewhere, and I got all this hate stuff online from Todd fans, but I thought he was some kind of derelict or something. I thought he was the guy that they hired to clean the place. And he was just hanging around. It's kind of, who is this guy? And then he came over and said, hey, you mind if I take out a guitar and play along with you? And that's what he did. And we played two-piece for hours together in this basement club. And over the next few trips back down, we always met up. And then he said, hey, I want you to meet a friend of mine. And that was Carson. And Carson had this little basement apartment. He said, you can stay over there if you want. So the three of us were staying together in Carson's little basement apartment. And that's where we put together the band. And I know Todd and I had to make a plan. Carson was just he wasn't in a band at the time. So Todd and I had made a plan to quit our bands at the same time, on the same day, so as not to cause bizarre rumors. You know, everything's a soap opera, and it was a really small community of young musicians there. So anything anybody did was on the tip of everybody else's tongue. So we planned to quit our bands on the same day. Yeah, which we did.
And so, Stewkey, you said that then the three-piece of Carson, Rundgren, and Thom.
Yeah, I was in a folk rock band.
By the way, oh, wait a minute. Can I just correct something so that you know it? Because I heard you do it on the other show. Carson's name, his first name is Carson. His last name is Van Austin. It's one word. I mean, it's, you know, it's a, whatever it is, Dutch or something, but it's not Austin. It's Van Austin.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, I don't mean to sound silly.
Oh no, just I know because I'm German, but because Van means of Austin, so it's sort of like, you know, that's why like a lot of, I mean, Stewkey as a German person might know that, you know, like.
Yeah,
anyway.
but I didn't know what the men in German know, but Van Austin is his last name.
Like Irish, right?
No offense meant to Carson Van Austin, wherever he may be.
But it's good to have it right.
Yeah,
it's good to have it right.
So how did you hook up with the three of them again, Stewkey?
I was playing in a band called Elizabeth.
Yeah,
we were like Thom. This place was 2 blocks from where he was jamming in this the basement club. This was just like a row house in the middle of a block, and it was just a coffee house, just a coffee house. And I was playing in a band called Elizabeth. It was folk rock. After one evening, after we were playing in there, he asked to talk to me outside, and there he asked me to join. And he said that they were going to be into music type like The Who and bands like that genre, which I wanted to do. So it really was an easy choice for me. So that's how it happened. And then I met Thom and Carson, and I joined them in that basement apartment.
So let me just ask this, because you mentioned it earlier that you took a little swipe about Todd singing. And I have to say, I was never a great Rundgren fan in terms of the soft stuff. That's why it was a revelation that I think he was in a band that, you know, songs like Magic Me, which are really scorching kind of bluesy songs. But I wonder, and we can talk a little bit later about what went wrong within the mechanics of the band, but I wonder if the very fact that Todd has a kind of warbly, I call it, if you give a little warble to James Taylor and remove the Southern accent, that's what his voice reminds me of. And if you listen to online, there are the acetate versions of songs, or the songs where you hear Todd singing and whatnot. And I mean, it's clear that you're a much better singer. And I'm not saying that this is not to rip on Todd or anything, but it's clear that you're not only a better singer, but your voice is more suited for that hard rock stuff. Whereas his, you know, the whole Laura Nero thing that you read about online is more suited for those gentle kind of piano songs. So it almost seems as if it was almost destined that because of his singing style and what his voice fit naturally better into would, you know, and lead to him leaving the band.
Well, I don't know. I think he just left the band because he got tired. He used us up, and he didn't need us anymore. He didn't need us to get where he wanted to be. You know, that's my opinion.
When we got together, the job of being instrumentally three-piece was too demanding for anyone to take over singing, and that was the main reason for that choice. We hadn't really done anything, so we didn't know if Todd could have been a singer or not, although we didn't think so. The three of us didn't. And I remember I came down for one of my weekend trips, and they said, hey, we got a singer. And I said, all right, great. Now we can, you know, that was like, now we could get started. And so we had Stewkey, and that's when I met Stewkey, yeah.
So let's talk about how you guys got signed, what the management, because other than internal things within a band, the reason most bands break up is they have rotten management. You know, you hear constantly, you know, going back to the 30s and 20s, you know, with blues singers being ripped off, you know, especially black artists being ripped off by their management. And then you always hear about rock bands that were driven into the ground, and, you know, people had their hand in the till, and the guys were not, the creative element of the band was not making anything. Who first signed you, and how overall, you know, what memories or things can you tell me about the management and what part that played in the band's success or not, you know, not lasting?
Go ahead, Thom. Thom, go ahead. You
No.
have the.
I can talk endlessly, and I know so much of this stuff. There's a little more to it than people say, or than people know. I call it, there's a lot of mythology out there, not, you know, I mean, misinformation, not misinformation.
Yeah.
It's fantasy information, stuff that never really happened. But when we got together, you know, the music in a big city like Philadelphia in 1967, it was kind of like the gold rush in Alaska or something. everybody was rushing to get into it. So when we actually, Todd and I quit our bands, and then we got Stewkey into the band, and we announced we were a band, and we picked the name. The first name Todd picked was really weird. It was he wanted to call the band the Third Rail. I don't know if you remember that, Stewkey. Third rail meaning the rail in the subway system that carries the electricity.
Yeah.
So then we settled on Nazz, and we got two local guys who ran a music store, a record store, Jack Warfield and Jerry Batoff, wanted to be our managers. So did Paul Fishkin, who was involved with Woody's Truck Stop. But the guys that had the record store, they had a place where we could rehearse. They promised they would get us some backing, and we were shooting for $10,000, which happened.
Gave us
And
a
we
house
had
to live in?
a house, a house to live in, a townhouse to live in. No furniture, but a house and a bunch of mattresses.
Oh, we had furniture. We had a wheelchair. Come on.
So, I mean, I can remember I would often be up in that room above the record store where we rehearsed. I'd be up there 6, 7 hours a day, just banging on the drums. I knew I had a lot of work to do, and I just was trying, and I just loved that more than anything. We didn't have any money. Our deal with the Jack and Jerry was that they would give us a place to live. They'd get us the money for equipment and expenses. They'd give us $1 a day for food each, $1 a day for food each. And any money that we could earn at the coffee houses, we could keep. So that was our deal with them. And Jack's wife, Annie, would send us huge boxes of food and stuff like that to the house, so we wouldn't actually deplete. Yeah, I think that's how we got started. There's a bigger story with how we got signed and the big management. If you want to hear that now.
Yeah, if you unless Stewkey has something to add about.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just say I love those guys. What they did for us in the beginning, and they gave us an opportunity. And our first gig was our first pay. I guess our first significant job is opening up for the Doors.
Yeah, I've read that.
And that was a gas. That was a real gas.
Was Morrison, as I would say, was he in one of his drunk manic episodes, like his legend goes, or was he a cool guy?
No, I didn't see any evidence of anything other than he was just in a space of his own.
Okay.
Very aloof and very unapproachable.
It's pretty obnoxious, though. Like all the stage crew and the venue people complained because they had to walk around, clean up all the spit that he spit right onto the stage floor, stuff like that. He was sort of trying to challenge the world with a certain kind of contempt. And it worked. I mean, you know the story about that. They got paid $500 for that gig, and we got $300. They came down from New York, where they were playing one of the clubs in the Village, in a van, and they used all of our gear, all of our equipment. And then they left.
So
I thought it was a good opportunity for us at the time. But I must say that we were wearing wool suits in the middle of the 1st of July. And the outfits were pretty. I wouldn't say they were comical, but they were. I don't know how to express it. What would you say those suits and outfits were, Thom? How would you
Did
express?
we have those already?
Yeah, we had those in that gig. Yeah.
What was the name of that clothing store?
I think you were wearing one of those big, huge shirts that had the tassels that you could tie in a bow or something like that.
I don't think I know I didn't wear a suit for that one.
It took the jacket off. Yeah.
Yeah. Was
But
it
that
the
was-
Lions Den? That was the name of the store we bought those at, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. You're
Yeah.
right. Lions Den's right.
Okay.
Anyway,
Uh,
but you can continue, Thom, talk about New York if you want to talk about that. You got most of the.
Go ahead, Thom.
we were just bouncing, we did that. I mean, I had to walk, I was still in school. I was taking finals and I had to run out of school and hitchhike real fast to Philadelphia to do that show. And then I never went back to school. But that was in June, I guess, of '67. And
Yeah.
we were living down there in all sharing that house at that point.
Townhouse, yeah.
And going out, just our job was just to become a band. I mean, become a better band or become a band ready to record. And I know that there was a show at the Philadelphia, was a sports arena or something. Was that a place? Anyway, it was a big venue, and the Who were playing. They were opening up for the Mamas and Papas, and after we all went to the show, and of course loved it because we were all Who fans. And then we went back to the house, and I know Todd and I decided to go to the Holiday Inn in downtown Philadelphia where the Who were staying, and see what was going on. And Carson and Stewkey didn't want to go with us, so we went. Somehow, as 19-year-olds, we got into the bar, and I was sitting at the bar talking to Roger Daltrey. It was a big party in the bar. I guess they took over the bar, and then Daltrey says, "Oh, I got some young girls up in my room I've got to go talk to," and he left. And this guy came over and started talking to me. He said, "Who are you?" And I said, I'm Thom. And he said, what are you doing here?" And I said, well, just love the band. And anyway, we talked, and I told him that we had a band. And about that time, Todd came wandering over, and he met this guy also, John Kurland. And Kurland said, what are you guys, he told us who he was. And he said, what are you doing? Are you doing any playing? And it just happened that we had a gig the next day. It was in, I don't know what park the gigs were in.
Trauma?
But we had a gig the next day, and we told him about it, and he and his assistant came over and to see us play. And afterwards they hung out, and they said, well, we're starting a management company, and blah 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 blah, and would you guys like to come up to New York and talk about it? And we said, well, how do we, they left us with their car, their rent-a-car. It was like a Barracuda or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't remember the car. I don't remember who drove.
Yeah, probably Carson.
Probably Carson.
It certainly wasn't me. People still don't want to ride with me. But anyway, that's how we met John Kurland, and we had to tell our managers Jack and Jerry what was going on, and they were starting to get a little upset because they had gotten us this $10,000 with which we bought all of our new equipment, lots of guitars, a drum kit, a lot of microphones and stands and stuff like that, and we'd been just playing gigs around Philadelphia, most of which were failures. We'd get thrown out of clubs on the first set of a 5-set night.
Wasn't us. It wasn't because of us. It was because of the type of music that we were playing. All I had to do is hear Todd warming up. And this guy came out of this office of this club one time, waving his hands up in the air. And no, I can't have that here. And threw us out.
One guy told us, "You guys will never be the Souls," meaning the Soul Survivors, who had a young residence there and then went on to get a record deal. Anyway, so
very good too, by the way.
You guys will never be the Souls. We you remember the Soul Survivors, Dan?
I know the name, but I can't.
Expressway
to Your Heart. Expressway to Your Heart.
Okay.
So we went up to New York. Maybe it was like a week or 10 days later, and hung out. And these guys said they wanted to manage us. It was John Kurland, and his assistant. What was his name?
Mike Friedman.
Mike Friedman, the guy who gets. Well, that'll come up later. And so we had to, and we said, but we owe these guys that are managing us, money. They've been taking care of us. They got us. We owe at least $10,000, which is the amount they got us.
A lot of money
for equipment. Yeah, and they're going to be really mad at us and blah blah blah. And so John promised to pay them back all the money that we owed them and make sure that it was fair. And we said, okay. So we uprooted and went to New York. And at first we were living in his office, if I'm not mistaken.
Or his apartment.
On
apartment first.
East 57th, was it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, his apartment was upstairs and the office was downstairs.
Right.
And we had the office and a back room there, and that's where we were living for a short time. And then they found us our famous house in Great Neck, New York, to move into. Back then it was, we were kids, so a band house was the right place to go. Oh no, first we tried living in a loft. They were like in the village, because I remember out the, in those lofts, they have the big crooked windows.
Mm-hmm.
And we could look out those windows to see the construction of the Twin Towers. Saw them going up floor by floor. Remember that?
No.
You don't remember that? It only lasted about 2 weeks because if we'd stayed any longer, we would have killed each other. It was pretty small. It was more like a barracks for us than an apartment. So then, they found us a house in Great Neck, New York, Long Island.
So let me just ask a couple of things regarding stuff online about the marketing of the band, since we've gotten to the point of your management company. First off, there seemed to have been this bizarre attempt to make you into a bubblegum pop kind of band. You were on like the Teen Beat and the Tiger Beat, the magazines for the 14, 15, 16-year-old girls, which I'm sure as 19-year-olds that was perfectly fine in that sense. But, there were all of these kinds of odd little things that, you guys were closer to the Yardbirds than you were to the Monkeys or Herman's Hermits, as Stewkey had mentioned earlier. You know that you didn't have who's the Herman's Hermits singer, the leader, Peter Noon. You know, you didn't have that kind of all. Your songs were not like Mrs. Jones, you have a lovely daughter, whatever it was. So was there a thing where you said, why are they making us these kind of teeny bopper idols rather than a serious band? Because you know, I mentioned, I think in one of my contacts with you, and there's a page on Facebook, the Nazz page. Thom, do you run that? Do you run that page?
Some Todd fan actually runs it.
Okay.
And put it together. And he made Stewkey and I administrators.
Okay.
I don't really go near it anymore. I looked at it at first, but when I realized it was really all about supporting Todd and not about any kind of historical Nazz thing, I sort of stepped away.
The reason I ask is because I saw you had some posts on it, and I saw there were some photos of like original copies of the pages of interviews with each of the guys, like, and there was one page I remember of yours, Thom. I don't know if it was on that Nazz Facebook page or was it somewhere else in looking over, but you know, they'd have like, you know, Stewkey's favorite sandwich is peanut butter and clams or some, you know, crap like that. And you know, then Thom, it seemed like you were being marketed. I think there was one page that said, Thom, he's the cute one. You know, Todd was the wizard, Carson was the bassist, they're always just the bassist, Stewkey was the lead singer, and you were sort of pigeonholed as the Paul McCartney, the cute one that the girls would all go, ooh, Thom. So talk about that kind of the management trying to make you the Monkeys, Herman's Hermits, rather than, you know, an American Yardbirds, let's say, which is where the Nazz comes from, the term. Or at least that's
the Nazz also comes from a comedian, a beat comedian named Lord Buckley.
Okay.
And he had a series of albums all about the Nazz.
Oh, okay.
Which is short for the Nazarene. But so there were two sources. I had all those Lord Buckley albums when I was in college. They were on a label like American Pacific or something like that. But
they were great.
That whole marketing as a teen thing was, well, first off, we were 19 and 20.
Yeah.
Carson was a year and a half or 2 years older. But it's not that someone aimed for that and chose it. It's that that's what we had available. Mm. And that's where we would get a response. And John Kurland, he was actually a public relations specialist. Yeah. That's what his business was before he got into managing. And in his PR firm, he handled people like the Mamas and Papas, and I think he might have handled Herman's Hermits or something like that. So he had connections. So he got us up to New York and introduced us to people like Gloria Stavers, who is the legendary editor of 16 magazine. And she took to us in a big way. Mm. She actually had us all come in for meetings where she taught us how to pose for pictures. I mean, that kind of stuff. And of course we complained, but at the same time, when your family's calling you from home saying, oh, I got this magazine and you're in it. You don't fight that. Well, you know, this was new world to all of us. We weren't mature enough to make any call about that. We were happy. There was no reason anyone else should be dealing with us. We had no record. We didn't even have a record deal yet. Mm-hmm. We had no record. we didn't even have demos. We were doing demos through John's connections. He was paying for all that. And so the magazines took to us right away, and that helped us get a record deal. Unfortunately, we got the wrong record deal, but we did get even though our record company was SGC, we made them start that because we wouldn't let them put us on Coal Gems with the Monkees. I mean, at least we stood up for something. So they started SGC. I think it was us and Paul Anka on that label. And Rolling Stone wouldn't even consider an article about us as rockers, even though John Landau was a big fan of ours and actually wrote the liner notes to the first album. Apparently John, I used to stay in John Landau's couch when I went to Boston, but he said that he and Jan Winter hassled constantly over the fact that Jan wouldn't have anything to do with us. And John loved us. So it was hard. It was hard to get any attention for us. So we took advantage of what we had. And don't forget, from the time we started recording our first album until we finished recording the second one, it was less than 9 months. I mean, that, given a little more time, we would have found our place, our right place in the business, but we just didn't have time to get there. So we took advantage of what we had, which was teens.
Yeah. So let me ask, because it's online in several places, that the management of the band didn't want you playing live shows. They wanted more the fan service rather than the shows. And it seems to me, if that's true, that's an odd thing to do, because word of mouth of how good a band is everything. I remember the first concert I went to in the late 70s was Motorhead was the opening act, and not the opening act, they were the main act. The opening act was a band called the Gods, Godz, and they were terrible. But Motorhead was Motorhead, and if you ever listen to them, the lead singer Lemmy, well, he was quite a character. But the band the Gods, they were like a garage band that practiced maybe 3 times before they were on stage. They were horrible. So is that story about not wanting you guys to actually play? Is that so?
I'm not sure.
I know Stewkey has feelings about this. I'll give you mine after he.
What did you say, Tom?
I said, I know you have feelings about that, and I said I'll express mine, but let Stewkey talk for a minute, because
Yeah, I mean, I always thought it was ridiculous that we weren't playing. I didn't understand. I just didn't understand it, and we had a few gigs. I mean, there was some good gigs we played with the Bee Gees at I can't remember the name of the place now, but and got sabotaged on that gig. They turned our microphones off. But it always stuck in my craw. That's all I have to say, really, about that. It's always stuck in my craw, and I just didn't understand it. And I guess it was because I was young, and I just wanted to do what I was loving doing. I just wanted to play, and I didn't understand it. And I've been disgruntled about it for the whole time, but what are you going to do? Tom has a different explanation that I
see it differently. Yeah. It's really weird, because we played every gig that we could afford to play. shows with Procol Harum. We did shows with Spirit, and the list. There's a huge list of people that we did shows with. We played everything in New York that we could. We did the Steve Paul's Scene. We did the Cafe A Go Go. We did places on Long Island. We did everything we could get to, and the only thing we didn't do is we didn't go out and do 5 set a night, 5-nighters, which is what bands did. We didn't have the material, and we couldn't, and we weren't a dance band, and we couldn't have. Every time we tried to do an extended day gig in a club, we got canned. So I just remember everything that was. There weren't like there were through the 70s and 80s. There were all those showcase clubs, which were I played those circuits over and over again, and there was one of those in every major market in the world. A great club like the Agoras and Toad's Place in Connecticut and places like that, but they didn't exist in 1968. And we, in that course of that 9 months, we did 2 albums. We moved. We went to Europe. When we were recording our first album, we played at the Whiskey A Go Go in Los Angeles 2 weekends in a row. We took a break from the studio to do that. So I don't know where that myth of not playing enough came from.
Probably from me.
We were up against a lot of criticism too. Like the local people in Los Angeles slaughtered us at the Whiskey, heckled us and booed us.
Well, let me just ask, because Stewkey, Thom mentioned you had gone to Europe. I think there's also a story about you guys wanting to record over, was it in Britain or France or whatnot, and you couldn't because of a musicians union or something like that?
Yeah, I believe that the reason was because there was a musicians dispute between England and the United States.
Okay.
And I believe the other part of it is we went kind of over there on false pretense. I believe that the papers said that we were singers. And we got off.
Our visas didn't allow us to play instruments.
And our management told us when we were getting off the plane to do a Beatles shot on the ramp going down to the tarmac and make sure everybody's holding a guitar. So I'm sure the union put 2 and 2 together and busted us right in the middle of setup at Trident Studios, trying to set up, get levels and etc. And they came in, cease and desist order, and told us to drop everything and leave.
So basically, it was sort of it was bungled from the point of following the rules of the country in terms of having session players rather than you guys playing.
I'm sure
there was a lot of U.S. backlash because of all the British bands that were coming over and taking home a lot of American money. And so they had these reciprocating rules, like blah, blah, blah. Somebody came here, somebody else has to go there. And we went over with bad visas. Our visas wouldn't allow us to play. And when they saw us with all those, we had a public relations firm meet us at the airport to try to create some kind of vibe. That was sort of a style then.
So let me turn to a couple.
So yeah, we got in the studio. We were in the famous Trident studio. It was brand new.
Yeah.
You know, the thing like you see in the Hard Day's Night with the control room
Yeah.
up above, looking
Yeah.
down. And I know I set up under the control room, and we were just trying to mess around and get sounds and stuff like that, or just trying to get started. We had guitars with us, but all the amps and drums and stuff were rented stuff, so we had to get used to that. And yep,
And they would have,
in
and they
comes
were,
the union and the police and shut us down.
and they would have
I have
danced.
the I
They
have
would
the
have
8-track.
blackballed everybody, right? If a musician played with us, they were going to blackball that musician in England, so they couldn't work either. So
Right.
it was pretty serious.
So let me talk about a couple of the only two sort of videos that the band has on YouTube, at least, and I don't know if there are any others floating out there. The first one was obviously, a familiar type of video that became popular in the '80s with you guys from Open My Eyes, and you guys look like you're zombies from Night. Whoops, what happened, Tom? Oh,
He's
okay,
there.
Sorry.
he's back.
I
So
I get twitchy and I
so-
hit a button.
okay. So the first,
But I have the 8-track from that day.
yeah,
We did a rough version of Under the Ice, just trying to get sounds,
Uh-huh.
no vocal, and we have a version of Christopher Columbus with a vocal on it.
yeah, and that was one of Carson Van Osten's few songs, Christopher Columbus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the video that you did for Open My Eyes, it has you guys sort of wandering around like from Night of the Living Dead, and you come upon these beautiful girls, and you're not even, it's not even an attempt to make it look like you're playing and whatnot. In 1968, my question is, where would a video like that have been? Was that a video that's a promo video that's going to go out to record stations so that they can see you guys? And the second video I just want to mention is Not Wrong Long, where you guys are on like a Philadelphia TV station, or maybe it's Baltimore or something, and you guys are playing.
Los Angeles.
It's Los Angeles.
It's Los Angeles.
Okay, and it's
It was a-
We were in the Raiders show.
okay.
It was another Dick Clark production. Yeah. Hosted by Mark Lindsay.
Uh-huh.
Happening 70 or happening 69 or something.
Yeah.
It was a year ahead of us.
It was all. I think it was. They had like 3 or 4 different programs. Bandstand was one.
Yeah.
They had.
But that one we did where we did Not Wrong Long.
Yeah, that was Los Angeles.
That was Los Angeles.
So I can remember the Steel Pier where you used to work. That place that used to hold. They played it at that venue. They would play
on the Steel Pier, yeah.
Yeah, they would play it at different venues.
Yeah.
I don't know, in between sets or something like that, or promotion. Anyway, it was used that way.
And the Open My Eyes video, what is that? Just a promotional video to promote the band, and was it sent out to radio stations for them to look at? Or
every market, every TV market had its own bandstand show, local bandstand type of show.
Okay.
And we couldn't get to those places. And it was the early days of video, and that was what those were for, to get them played in places where you couldn't get to. And that included live venues and stuff like that. They were trying to market them that way. But there was no, there was no big TV outlet for that kind of thing.
Now, since you guys were branded as a Philadelphia band, you guys are certainly an outlier in the sense that when people in the late 60s or 70s think of the Philadelphia sound, they think of, soul or even blue-eyed soul like Hall & Oates. So were you guys was there a thriving rock scene in Philadelphia at that time? Or were you guys, just sort of a niche in your putative home city?
Well, we left Philadelphia. So we weren't a part of all of that stuff that happened there. all of the new bands that came up in. But I I do remember there was a thriving rock and roll scene there back in the 70s, early or
You know,
late 60s.
that was the Woody's truck stop, Elizabeth,
Yeah.
us kind of movement
Sweet Stave and
they tried.
Shane, Edison
Yeah.
Electric. Yeah.
Do you remember the Boston sound with they released like 3 or 4 bands from Boston at the same time and tried to call it the Boston sound? That was just
Yeah.
marketing fad stuff. It worked a lot better in Seattle in the 80s, but didn't work so well for Philadelphia and Boston.
So I want to talk about the songs, but I'll save that towards the end, because very rarely when people are interviewed, artists are interviewed, is the process of the creation of a song talked about it. So I do want to talk about at least a couple, 2 or 3 of the songs at the end. But just to finish through with the chronology, so Carson Van Ossen was the first to leave. And he went off to work for the Disney company, I guess. Was he disgruntled? Because I think, Stewkey, you had mentioned earlier that Carson had left a band before Woody's Truck Stop, or he was the first to leave Woody's Truck Stop. Did he not feel like he was a musician? Was he more into this animation? Was that why he left? And did that precipitate then Todd leaving, or was Todd bound to leave anyway? How did the 2 of them then exit the band?
Go ahead, Tom. You know the true answer for this because you spent time with.
Well, Carson and I stayed good friends for his entire life. I spoke to him just days before he passed away, and when I would go after I moved up here to Washington State, whenever I'd go to Los Angeles, I'd stay with Carson. I was at his, we were all good friends. So he told me stuff that aren't part of the story that most people have reproduced. But leaving, when we were in New York and we started to, and when we did our first record deal, we gave away most of the publishing to get $50,000 to sustain the business. So that's what we were living on, plus whatever we could generate, and plus whatever other kind of deals we could make. And but at that point, we got out of all living together in a band house, and decided that 2 of us could go to get one place, and 2 of us could get another place. So Carson and Todd, it was the obvious division, because Stewkey and I were roommates on the road. We were friendly. Todd and Carson knew each other longer than any of us did. We just all assumed they should be roommates. So they got an apartment up in the 70s somewhere in Manhattan, and Stewkey and I moved out to a swinging bachelor pad in Northport, Long Island.
With a payphone.
With a payphone in the kitchen. But Carson, when we were doing the second album, as soon as we said no to Todd, he was gone. I mean, he was still there, but he was gone. He was working on creating an atmosphere where he could be the boss of everything, never be told no. And Carson was his roommate. And I think Carson knew long before we even finished the second album that Todd was leaving. Todd announced it. Todd was out shopping, farming himself, trying to find new management, trying to find record deals, trying to find everything. And Carson knew that. So Carson just burned out. And just, Carson was a very mellow, sweet, calm, organized, complete guy. When you listen to his playing, his songs, I mean, his even his performance on any song, it's a complete picture. It's not unconventional, and there's just I've never listened to a Nazz record and said there's something wrong with the bass. It's always just unnoticeably complete in the background. I think that was, and his life was like that. He didn't like problems. He really didn't like emotional problems. And he was living in the midst of Todd, and Todd and Mike Friedman were actively trying to take Todd away and get him somewhere where he could be the boss of all things, which they eventually did. So Carson left. He actually did it by mail. He sent us a letter. I mean, we knew he was leaving anyway, but he made the first announcement, and he sent us a letter with a price list. He said he'd be glad to continue working with us because he needed money, and he sent us a price list for all the different possible options that might come up, like how much he would pay. He needed to be paid for a gig, how much he needed to be paid for a gig if it was out of town, and that kind of thing.
So let's talk then about post band when you broke up, because one of the more interesting things that I found out in just Googling was that the band, once Todd and Carson had left, by adding and subtracting and whatnot over the course of a couple of years, there was a band called Fuse, the Sick Man of Europe, and then eventually became the basis of Cheap Trick. So how did that all morph, and how did you guys then leave the band, and or did you play a while with people like Rick Nielsen?
Well, we were
Want me to go?
we were in Texas. Thom and I continued the band, and we had some gigs to fulfill. One of them was Texas International Pop Festival, and Thom got the two players, friends of his from college, to fill in for Carson and Todd, and we tried to carry on.
When
Thom was taking all the phone calls from New York, we were still being managed by New York, Texas, and the Southwest, trying to play and continue. And then I'll let you take it from there, Thom. We hooked up with Showco and tried to continue, and tell them the story about us after doing a gig in St. Louis.
No. When Carson left, Curlin called me up and said, "Okay, Carson wants to leave. He said there's a price list. What do you want to do? Do you want to just hire Carson whenever you have something that requires a band?" And I'm trying not to swear, but I said, "No, if we have to, if he's gone, then we have to replace him anyway. Why put it off?" So I just called a friend from college, a bass player.
Was that the fellow in the Not Wrong Long video, the blonde guy?
No, the blonde guy in the Not Wrong Long video is Jim Lowe, who was our engineer for the second album.
Okay.
Why Carson wasn't there, but we just called Jim. Then we had to find a bass. We didn't even have a bass. But Carson left, so I got Greg Simpler to come, I think it was, a guy I went to school with, to play bass. And Todd was still doing gigs. I'd have to call him. The agency would call me or John, and John would call me, or some combination, and tell me that there were these gigs and they were important, and they were in Ohio. That we did all the hullabaloo clubs and stuff there. And so I have to call Todd and say, okay, we got some gigs this weekend. We're going to leave, Thursday. We'll be back Sunday night or something. And he started doing shit to me like he'd say, oh, well, I'm going to wire a friend's apartment for a new stereo this weekend, so I can't do it. And I was starting to get like a lifelong headache or something. So I'd have to either cancel the gigs, which meant we were going to lose the agency connection, or get somebody to do it. So I was getting guys I knew, and I was really young, and I was from the boondocks of Pennsylvania, and I didn't know a lot of people. And but we did it, some with Todd, some without Todd. Then Todd finally quit altogether. This was within a couple of months this was actually, he wanted to stick around for the release of the second album so that he could get whatever he needed from it, which is it's a good motive. And so then I got another guy to fill in when Todd didn't, and we were off on the road in a van, and I think the bands often would fly, and then the equipment would go in this van we owned in New York, and we did some gigs in St. Louis. And we were, when we did those gigs, the money went to the agency, then the agency took their cut, then forwarded it to the manager, then the manager spent it for us. And I called New York, I called John, the manager, and I said, there had been a lot of tragedy in the process anyway. John's wife had just died. The band was falling apart, in which he had invested a tremendous amount of his reputation and money, his own personal money. And I called him, I said, we're in St. Louis. I need money to pay the guys and pay the hotels and stuff like that. And he said, Thom, you don't have any money. I decided to take out all of my back commissions, and I'm closing my office, and I'm leaving for he ended up in Key West, living in a his wife had died, so I guess he came out of the closet and was living that way in Key West. But yeah, so he said the office will be here for another month. A lot of you guys' stuff will be here if you want to come back and get it. And that was it. We were sitting in St. Louis. I couldn't even pay the hotel bill. Yeah. And our next, I got a list of the gigs we were on the road to do, and started calling and canceling. And we had some gigs in Dallas and Houston. And I called, I think the promoters was a company, young company called Showco, who was just a concert promotion company at the time. So before they became an international sound company. And Jack Calmes and Angus Wynn. And I said, I'm sorry, man, we got to cancel. We can't get there. Everything's falling apart. Our manager took off with whatever money we had. And he said, okay, hang tight, let me get back to you. So he said, come on down. I'll get you, I'll send you some money to get yourselves here. I'll get you set up here. And if you want to turn over some of your management to us, we'll take care of your business for you. So that's how that happened. We ended up living in a couple of apartments in Dallas for the next 8 months, 6 months, something like that. And yeah, That's how all that happened. And unfortunately, most of the burden was falling on me. I was getting all the phone calls. The agents were calling me directly. We had no management left. I mean, we didn't even have access to. We still had a record company, and they were still buying ads for us when we, go to a new place to play, and they were still pushing records. We still had whatever they call those guys out on the road pushing records back then, promoters.
Yeah. So Tom, it sounds like the idea that the Nazz morphed into Cheap Trick isn't true.
No, not in any way.
Okay.
After we worked in Texas, based out of Texas for a long time. We did everything all over the South. We did Oklahoma. We did Louisiana. We did all of Texas. We did that Texas International Pop Festival in front of about, I don't know, I think the day we played, we had an audience of about 80,000.
Yeah.
And we were doing pretty well. We were getting paid well, and we were living, and but it got really depressing. I was carrying way too much of the burden. I thought I was still at this point, had just turned 21. I walked into the bathroom of the apartment I was in one day, and there's the bass player, my friend from college, hitting up heroin, and I just slunk against the wall. Said, "Oh my God, what am I? How, that's not a real dependable kind of person to have to rely on." So we did great at the Texas Pop Festival. I still run into people who saw it and they're talking about it. And then our last gig ever was, I think, like the 1st of November, 69, right?
Yeah, I think so.
It was in El Paso, Texas, and we at the time we were still back in a #1 song on that market on radio. Hello, It's Me was #1 in El Paso at that time.
Yeah.
So we were supporting that, and we had a guy. We went through a lot of guitar players. We never really had time, because we couldn't support ourselves, had time to sit back and just find the right guy. We had a guy named Gary Nicholson, who's now like a extremely successful songwriter. He's the guy that played guitar on our last gig with us. Look him up, Gary Nicholson. He's won a ton of country awards. And that's the night you were up on top of that El Paso sports arena getting high, and you fell down the steps and broke your ankle.
No, I did. I thought I don't remember getting high, but I remember tripping up the stairs, going to the stage. Maybe it wasn't this one, but another one.
That's the gig, El Paso.
Yeah,
I took you to the emergency room.
I just sprained it real bad, and I went to the emergency room, and they wrapped it all up, and they asked me if I wanted pain medication, and I said no, because I wouldn't be able to do the gig. So I came back and we did the gig. I hopped on one foot.
I think you did the gig first, and then we went to the.
Well, maybe I never hopped on one foot.
Yeah, because I remember watching. I kept asking you, "Show me your ankle," and it was puffing up.
But show must go on, right, Tom?
So I got, so I just burnt out that night. That was just it for me. I completely burned out. I couldn't.
So let me just
And
ask
we
you
went back.
both then. Let me just ask you both because from the time that the Nazz ended, and I saw that video that from 2019, I think it was, at a Philly radio station where two guys are talking. It seems, if I recall correctly, it's been a month or more since I looked at it. You two had not been in touch for like 40 years at some point. Is that
Oh,
so? And so from the time the Nazz ended, maybe you were both in a couple of bands here or there. What did you guys do? Did you become an accountant? Did one of you become work at a warehouse or a factory? And then in that 40-year period you weren't speaking, or you didn't. I guess you lost touch with each other. How did you
I was
make
in
money?
Cincinnati for one
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
That was in
Okay,
Cincinnati, and it
Cincinnati.
was 2019, just before the shutdown.
Yeah, we hadn't
So,
seen each other.
and it
We
was
hadn't seen
it
each
was
other
billed as a
since.
Nazz reunion, but it was because Todd was there in town for that Beatles tribute band
Yeah.
tour that he did.
Uh-huh.
And so Stewkey, and I finally, this guy, that's the same guy that has that website that the Facebook thing that
Okay.
you're talking about. And his whole entertainment business career seems to be a thing he has called Rundgren Radio. And that's where we were. So we went there, and the two of us played with a bunch of guys who tried to learn some Nazz songs. I think we only did about 7 or 8 songs.
5 or 6.
Yeah, and that was in just around Thanksgiving of 19, wasn't it?
November 2019. Yeah, November.
Yeah, and yeah, we hadn't spoken. The last time I had spoken to Stewkey
On the steps
before
of that
that
apartment building.
was the day I left Rockford, Illinois. Yeah.
No, not Rockford. Was it Rockford? Yeah, it was Rockford.
Wasn't a great conversation.
No.
And so I went back to LA, and Stewkey stayed there. But do you want to know how that happened?
Well, I'd rather hear though about because people when a ball player retires or something, people want to know what they do. So I mean, what did you guys do for day jobs to survive for those years that you were out of the music business, or did you sporadically go back and play with bands?
Well, I can start.
Okay.
I came back to Philadelphia. Well, actually, I stayed in Texas after that. Went up to Rockford to do Sick Man. That eventually I got fired from that band for. I had a daughter in the 70s. I worked as a bartender at a lot of clubs in Philadelphia for a lot of years. I worked as a shipper for a lighting company for a lot of years. And then I drove a limo for a lot of years. And then I got sick and needed a liver transplant. I got hepatitis C, and and since 2000, I had a liver transplant since 2000, and I'm doing very well, thank God. Knock on wood. And 75, so I've been on Social Security and disability for 20 more years. So in the meantime, I put another version of Nazz together with a bunch of friends that I met here in the neighborhood, actually, and did a bunch of gigs around in Philly and New York. We did some shows in New York, and that disbanded about I don't know, about 6 years ago.
Okay.
And since then, I've just been sort of looking for the next opportunity.
Okay.
If there is one, if there is one, I'll take it. Why not?
And how about you, Thom? What did you do in the intervening years?
I'm a gigolo. I live off of older women that I meet at the Eagles Club here in Washington. No, I never left music. I did a lot of albums in the 70s. First band I played with when I left Rockford and went to LA was a band called Pacific Ocean, and the lead singer was Eddie James, who is now known as Edward James Olmos. He's pretty cool guy.
Oh wow! I have no idea that he was
He
a
was
singer.
the lead singer.
Wow.
He's an Indian. He had black hair down to his waist, and every night before we'd go on, so we just did Otis Redding stuff, that kind of song. He'd go through a ritual combing of his Native American hair. He's a great guy. It was a really great band. Rick Vito was in that band, if you know who he is. He's another famous guitar player. That was the first band I was in. Then I was in a band called Hocus Pocus that became Detective after I quit. I started to tell people, if you want success, just get in a band with me, and then as soon as I leave, you'll have it. But that was with Michael Monarch and John Hyde and other guys. I worked with Andy Fraser for quite a while, the bass player from Free, who lived in Los Angeles. He's dead. Then one year I did 3 albums with 3 bands, and I did there was a band called Paris. Do you ever hear of Paris?
No.
That was me and Bob Welch and Glenn Cornick from Jethro Tull.
Oh, okay.
Bob Welch, Fleetwood Mac, and that's a pretty rocking album. I left that. I did the Curtis Brothers. We had Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks working with us all the time. Lindsey took some of the songs we did and took them with him to Fleetwood Mac and redid them and had big hits with them. I did a band called Tattoo. It was me and a bunch of Cleveland guys, Wally Bryson from Raspberries and Danny Klawan, famous Cleveland musician. Then I got burned out by that, and I went to work in a band that played in Hawaii 3 months in a row. And then we'd go to Phoenix for a month, and then we'd go to Vancouver, BC for 2 months, and then I started taking jobs again. I worked with a guy from up here in the Northwest, Danny O'Keefe.
Hi.
He was famous for a song, Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues. I did an album with him. And a couple of tours where we opened up for Jimmy Buffett and stuff, back then. So then I got.
It's hard to believe you're with Jimmy Buffett. That's my my father-in-law's favorite singer, Jimmy Buffett. My wife is always playing something there because she grew up listening to Jimmy Buffett.
I did worked on one album with him and used to play with him a lot in New Orleans. After that I went to work I just got burned out on bands and started going to work as a sideman, and I did a lot of that with a lot of different people. But then I got a job with Rita Coolidge in 1980, 81, and stayed with her for about 14 years. I became her music director and did that for about 10 years. 9 years maybe. And then I burned out on that. And I did a lot of work in between. I worked with Eric Burden and Robbie Krieger band for about 2 years. We played a lot of gigs. I've played with bands in like 35 countries. I've been to every continent except Antarctica playing music. So I stayed busy. Then in the 90s, I got really just tired of being a sideman, and I said, I'm going to go back to the clubs. And so that's when I got into Irish music and became kind of an authority on that. And
so do you consider something like the band or the group Celtic Woman, you know, that band?
Celtic Women, yeah.
Yeah.
I played with a band called the Twilight Lords in Los Angeles. So I think we were probably at one point for a couple of years, we're probably the, you know, biggest money-making band of that kind of unrecorded. And then I went to work on the road with a kind of a band I called Bluesabilly. It was me on drums, and we had an upright bass player, a guy on an electrified resonator guitar, like a dobro, that was National Resonator, and then a harmonica player. And we played a lot, all just constantly. We'd have to beg to stop. So there's a lot of music that goes on that doesn't gain a lot of notoriety.
Yeah.
I still do a lot of interviews for the band Paris and stuff like that. People are always calling me. It was one of those underrated bands. Bob was just a great singer, Bob Welch, and Glenn and I were friends until he died 6 years ago, I think.
Thom, you wanted to talk a little bit about clearing up some confusion about the interim, the whatever went on between Nazz and the Fuse sick man thing.
Yeah. God, I sometimes I get sick of hearing myself, but I'll keep going. If this could clear up, I read so much bogus stuff about that. Anyway, when we split up in November '69, I went back to Pennsylvania, had a ball. I stopped everywhere where I had friends from the road. I went back to St. Louis, back to Ohio, up to Boston, down around. A friend of mine from Altoona took my van, went off and lived in Cocoa Beach, Florida for a while, and then up to Portland, Maine, and then back to Pennsylvania. And then I started a band with a couple of local guys back there, and we were living in an A-frame on a ski mountain in Pennsylvania. And my mother called me and said, these guys from Los Angeles called you. And it was the Screen Gems people. And I had I had the 8 tracks from the second Nazz album. I had all the masters. And they wanted to release a third album, and they didn't have any of the music, except some of the little rough daily mixes that we would give them. So I said, no, it's not, there's no album here. I don't want to do it. And they said, you know, and they called a few more times and made me offers. And finally they called and started threatening me with lawsuits if I didn't turn over these tapes. And I said, okay, if it's gone to, and I was a kid, I didn't know what I was dealing with. I probably could have made them pay me. But I said, okay, you can try to do a third album, but I've got to come with it. I have to be there to make sure that you don't mess with it too much. So I went out to LA and I called Jim Lowe. He likes to say that Screen Gems called him and said, oh, we got all this stuff. We want you to produce an album. He didn't. I called him and asked him if he would engineer for me. And I booked the same studio that we had done the recording in, so that everything would be easy. And he and I went in and tried to turn that into something, and I didn't think it was there. It was all outtakes. It was it's still unfinished stuff.
Yeah.
We did the best job we could with it, and then I left, and I knew that we had finished it. I tried to keep them from releasing it, but I at the same time I said, well, they actually own it, so it's theirs. I can't do much about it. So I left. I went back to Pennsylvania, got my stuff, and moved to Los Angeles. And I was staying with Jack Warfield, who was our first manager. I was staying with him at his house, and he was running a chain of record stores on the West Coast, all over the West Coast. And he said, can you help me out? I got a manager who's stealing from me, and I just fired him, and I got no one to take over the store. Can you help me for about a week? And I said, sure. So I went down to this record store, and I was just, doing what you do to manage a record store. I didn't know, but I was getting by. And I got a phone call one day at this record store, and it's from this weird guy who says, I want you to, I want you to think about joining my band, and I'm going to send you a bunch of stuff. And he started sending me mail. I was getting mail every day, lists of songs that he liked and lists of ideas. And would I please come to Illinois and join his band? And I kept saying no. And after a few months, I got bored. And I said, okay, I'll try it out. So I went to Illinois and joined the band Fuse. And that was Rick Nielsen and Thom Peterson and 3 other guys. The drummer they were getting rid of, and they had a lead singer and another guitar player. And they wanted to get rid of the lead singer, and they kept asking me to call Stewkey. And I kept saying no. He's in Texas, and forgive me, but I said he's probably too high. And finally, after a few months of them nagging me, we were playing. I mean, this was a big operation. They were a local band, but local bands back there had trucks and massive crews and huge PA systems, and so that's what we were doing. So finally, I called Stewkey. I think I went there in January. I don't know what month you came up.
And this would have been 70?
Anyway, Stewkey came up.
I think it was the summertime.
And this was 1970?
Yeah.
Was it 71? It has to be 71.
All right.
January of 71 when I went there.
Okay.
The year in between was me doing that 3rd record.
Yeah.
And hanging out in Pennsylvania. And so we got Stewkey there, and we played gigs. We did a lot of work with those guys as the band Fuse. And then Thom and I like to joke about it because both Thom Peterson and I were trying to become alcoholics. And Stewkey at one point boasted that he thought he could take more acid than anybody else on earth. So Thom decided he was going to go to Germany, and he quit the band, and so did I. I quit the band too. But Thom went to Germany with an acoustic guitar and just wandered around over there. And I went back to LA and started, what became a permanent residence there. And that was the last, when I left, the day I left Rockford was the last time I spoke to Stewkey until November of 2019.
Well, I want to just say, you have quite a memory. I was telling in the break, I was telling Stewkey that I can't remember what I ate last Tuesday, and you're going back 50 years with this, but it must be burned into your minds. But I do want to talk here before we go about a handful of the songs here, because I think they're terrific songs, not just melodically and lyrically, but with a lot of the elements of the song. Because when I first reheard "Open My Eyes," as I mentioned, the thing that stands out about it versus music today, and I think of people because I work at a supermarket, so I hear, it used to be like 20 years before something became music in a supermarket from its release. Now it's like 20 days. You listen to stuff like Bruno Mars limp love songs, and the thing with "Open My Eyes," it's such a goddamn rich song. There's something going on. You can listen to it 5 or 6 straight times, and you just listen to the bass. You can listen to the drums. You can listen to the sort of wah wah or whatever it is. There's so much going on in that song. It's so rich, and it just really sucks you in. It's almost like a vortex. So I wanted to ask a little bit about each of what you remember of the songs and any contributions you made in terms of, well, I'm going to go with some fills here with the drums, or what you do with vocally or whatnot. So let me ask you, Stewkey, what are your memories about that song and its creation?
I like you. I just thought it was rocking. It was up. It was fresh, and we were all singing on it. It just sounded like it sounded like a Beatles song to me. I would have, in my head back then, it would have sounded like something like that. I mean, they were well done. The band was an exciting act. And recording it was just, it's kind of a blur, the actual sessions. I know that me, when I'm recording, I sometimes it takes me a little while to get it right, to where I feel comfortable with it, or where everybody seems to feel comfortable with it. I rely on other people to give me their feedback. I would just say the excitement of the tune. It was just, you listen to it in the studio, and it just blew you away.
Yeah, I know. Just listening to it, compared to modern auto-tuned crap where everyone has the same tinny metallic kind of voice, yeah, you can add, if you listen to it, and I think there's a version of what they call the acetate version of some of the songs. In that version, you can hear all 4 voices differently, and I don't know which one was Thom or which one was Carson or whatnot. But what is your memory of that song, Thom, and anything you added to it, in terms of the drumming?
Well, first thing, the version of that song that's on the first album wasn't recorded with the rest of the first album stuff. When we were still in New York and had a fresh record deal, and Screen Gems was demanding, well, also Epic, because our distributor was Epic, which was the best part of that contract. So we got to hang out with the Ertigans and stuff like that. But we wanted to self-produce, and they didn't want to let us self-produce. We had a rehearsal studio in the Carnegie Hall building, and we were auditioning producers up there. That's where we met people like Felix Pappalardi and humiliated him right out of the building. But it was terrible. We were punks. We were riding high, and we were punks.
We were going to demand something.
We went into a studio. under the guise of using a producer who we told them was Mike Friedman, who was really John Curlin's assistant manager in his company. That's our management. We took him in and labeled him as producer, and we produced that ourselves. The first version of Hello, It's Me and Open My Eyes. And then Screen Gems rejected it. And we went out to Los Angeles and did the whole album with a producer from Chicago named Bill Trout, who had a wonderful career. But he wasn't right for us. He was we just reduced him to a passive position of sitting in the studio reading trade magazines, and every now and then would have to give a nod of approval for something. And it's, but anyway, so when we tried to mix the first album, Open My Eyes and Hello, It's Me just weren't right. They just didn't work right. So we went back to those original versions that we had done in New York that have Mike Friedman listed as producer, but he wasn't that. But and those are the ones we used on the album. And things like that phasing stuff in there. Todd and I were both manic about it. I carried the Itchy-Coo Park around with me wherever I went, an LP, just to play it over and over again. And then we had to figure out how to do it in the studio. So we had to put two 8-track machines together and phase them in and out with each other to do that. But because that was like those were like new effects, and that's how that came about. The arrangement's just awesome, but it was all calculated to be radio friendly. Just that the intro, which people like to say is lifted from The Who, then the guitar line, which I like to say is lifted from The Ventures, and then the rest of it was us. The vocals we never stopped singing. If the four of us were in a room, we were singing, trying to harmonize. When we'd be in the studio, Todd was so loud, we'd have to turn him around and face the wall while the rest of us sang. We sang, 4 around into one microphone.
So, Stewkey, I wanted to ask you about the version of Hello, It's Me, because I never heard the Nazz version. I didn't even know it was, again, I didn't even really know that there was a Nazz. I only heard of what I think it was in 72 or 73 when Todd did his solo version of it. And the first time I listened to it, I was like, oh, that's interesting. But the more I listened to it, it works, I think, much better. There's a much more mournful quality to the song, which is apropos to the lyrics in your version and your voice in it. Whereas with Todd's version, it's not a bad version, it's not a bad song, but it has more of that kind of early 70s singer-songwriter feel, which I don't think emotionally connects with the listener as much. So let me ask you about the vocals of that. Was the song, the version that you did, the original version of the song, or was Todd's solo kind of more up-tempo, the original, and you guys slowed it down? What went on there?
No, the original was the original. The one I did was the original version.
Okay.
Todd upped it to, I always like to call it bossa nova, but it's a really beautiful song, and the melody is really it grabs you. It's probably the one song that most people comment to me about, that they remember the most, is Hello, It's Me.
And you mentioned it's a beautiful song. You have a beautiful song on the second album, and it's almost as if this version of Hello, It's Me is almost like a smaller miniature version of what becomes more operatic in that song. Can you talk about that song, a beautiful song, Stewkey?
I love singing it. It's another song that was very vocal friendly for me. and what it says. I like things that move me and when lyrics move me, it just kind of adds to how I feel about or how I express it, how I express myself.
Yeah.
And I always try to grab as much emotional, uh, as much of the emotion of the artist who wrote it. I try to, I like to call myself an interpreter of songs. You know what I mean? I like to know what made the person write the lyrics that he wrote. I try to grab that, and it just all comes out, and it's just a natural emotion for me.
Yeah. And because it's an 11-minute song, you guys mentioned opening for the Doors that one time. It's almost like the light version of When the Music's Over at the end. Those songs are so dark lyrically, and they're great songs and they're ponderous. But this song is almost like after all that stuff, it's sort of like the antithesis of that. Thom, what is your thoughts about A Beautiful Song? Do you remember anything particular about all the movements within that song? It's almost like 5 or 6 different songs in one.
Well, we never played that live.
No.
We never rehearsed it to play live. We recorded each of those segments separately and then edited them all together. And so some of those things are really short, and it was fun. Aside from the one vocal part, the rest of it was just instrumental and just make this one move, make this one slow down.
Mm-hmm.
The one part where I had to put towels on the drums and just to make a real muted sound. That was really fun and experimental to make these little sections work, knowing that we were going to edit them all together.
Now, I mentioned earlier, I think the first album was a really good album with a couple of really standout tracks, but I think the second album really, is just a fantastic album. And Forget All About It is the first song, and it starts off with sort of a little bell sound, and lyrically, one of the most interesting lines is one of the last lines that is sung by Stewkey. If you haven't got the time to rest, and take the record off now, and I tried to think of lyrics where the singer is singing something and they're breaking the fourth wall, as they would call it in film or TV, and speaking directly to, if you don't like this, end it. So it's interesting, but it's just a real rocking song. And then you go to Not Wrong Long, which I can't believe how that didn't become a hit, because that's another song like Open My Eyes that is so rich, and I think it's 2 minutes 40 seconds, something like that. It's just such a great song. What is your thoughts about those 2 opening songs on the second album? Either one. Stewkey, you want to go first?
Go ahead, Thom.
Forget All About It's my favorite song, I think, of the band. I just like. It's a rare case where I actually really like Todd's lyrics. I had a ball playing it. And I think in Todd's concept, when he wanted us to do a double album, that was him sort of challenging any listener, to keep it on. If you haven't got time to, that whole thing. But I really loved playing it. We had this knack of putting in all these little, tricky little alterations to just take you out and then pull you back in, even in songs like Hello, It's Me, even, and Open My Eyes, just those breakdowns. Those were kind of unusual for then.
Yeah.
And we had very, like, Forget All About It. I think that's another song I don't remember ever playing it live.
No, we never did.
Yeah.
So these things, we created them as we in the studio, and we weren't worried about too much of anything other than making it sound really pleasing to us.
And I want to talk about the song Rain Rider, because that's probably my favorite song of yours. I think it's another terrific song. But before I do, I just want to ask, it came to me, you know, the term power pop is associated with you. If you look online, everyone says, oh, one of the earliest power pop bands. But, you know, when I think of that term, I mean, you guys are so much more bluesy and rocking, and it's like, it's sort of like trying to apply the term to like the Yardbirds or whatnot. I mean, it's just not apropos. Well, let me just ask both of you, what did you think of that term power pop? Because I don't think it really applies to you guys.
It didn't exist when we were a band, so we couldn't have fallen into that category. That, you know, there were, when you opened up a music trade paper, a billboard in 1967, there were like two charts: pop music and R&B music. I mean, that's all anybody paid attention to. Now, good God, you can have a chart that covers just one artist. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. I don't know why everything needs to be labeled like that, but and I don't know where it came from.
Well, the thing that I like about Rain Rider as a song, other than the technical stuff, is it's about, you know, the singer Stewkey, and your voice. This is, I think, one of your best vocal performances, because there's a sense of bravado of the singer as the god Apollo, and then you have that sort of like falsetto, "Ride my chariot, baby," and you literally have a Greek chorus as part of the chorus, because you could see, you know, girls, you know, with fans and grapes feeding Apollo as they're singing this, if you're doing a music video. And I think it's just so great. And when I think of the harmonies that you guys were doing, if you saw the show I did with the critics, I said, you know, it reminds me of like the Zombies. Later on, someone like Boston, or even the first few records by Foreigner, where they had, you know, Cold as Ice. And these things that just really stamp on. And so that song, do you either of you guys have any comments?
We took a lot of pride in our vocals.
Yeah.
To get them to sound like a group. We worked hard at it, and I just like when I get my plane. Rain Rider, I enjoyed going from falsetto back to regular voice. It's something that McCartney does all the time. I guess I kind of learned it from him.
Yeah.
So I just enjoyed singing that stuff. I guess because I'm a singer, you know, a lot of those melodies are great.
Yeah, and I'm not a musical expert, so I don't know the grammar, but when your voice does go from the falsetto down, it's almost like going down a roller coaster. It does room and comes back up. You know, you have that sense of like of that arc. You know, again, I don't know the term.
Yeah, well, it gives you that you know, it gives you that sense of, you know, you go from regular singing voice to
yeah,
and you can do it without a hitch.
Yeah.
Like I just did there, but it's very effective in rock and roll.
Now, the lyrics of Meridian Leeward, which is one of those songs that, you know, I mentioned on the earlier show I did with the critic guys, that it has that kind of Yellow Submarine kind of nonsense stuff, which is a very British thing. You know, I remember Cream did what, My Baby Went Down the Plug Hole. You know, they'd have they do that on one of their albums. But here you have a song that, if you look at the lyrics, is very politically potent. I mean, it's about a pig, you know, cops, pigs, the army is mentioned, the military, and it's amazing that in '67 or '68 when you were recording this, that it would be recorded. Did you either of you guys? I mean, you were young guys then. Did you have any idea of the sort of the political potency of the lyrics? I mean, it's not a song that's as complex necessarily in terms of musically as some of the other songs, but it does go back between it's there's a sort of rockabilly kind of country feel to it. Any comments on that from either of you?
Well, that's Carson's personality was Meridian Leeward.
Oh,
That was him. That's and as far as I mean, for me, as far as what we thought, you know, the Beatles song "Piggy" was already out that George Harrison had written. So the only connotation to Piggy and you know the cow flying all around, blah 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 blah, was just a joke, really. I mean, it was just an expression. It was used then. I didn't feel like I wasn't worried about singing it. If
well,
that's
let me just quote some of the lyrics here. The last stanza: "I think I'd rather be a cop. I think that's what I'd like to do. I'd show you people a thing or two. If a man in blue starts beating on you, look out, because it might be me. You look like a cop, but you know you're a pig." Now, that's pretty in your face lyrics.
yeah. I don't know if we felt threatened by it.
No.
I don't think
That was the famous Vietnam era.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
talk about political involvement by young people. My God, that was the most active generation of my lifetime. I was in college then. But I mean, even in Philadelphia, I couldn't walk down the street without a couple of guys pulling their car over, rolling the window down and yelling, "Get a job."
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was a really politically active time. Carson's wife called me a couple months ago and said, "Can you tell me what that song Meridian Leeward's about?" I said, "Give me a minute. I'll try to re-listen to it and I'll call you back." But yeah.
Now,
You know,
one of the great rockers on that album is Under the Ice, and I think that's another one where both of your parts, the drumming and the singing, are great. But I have to ask about Hang On Paul, because online, and we're talking about myth information, as you said earlier, Thom, a lot of people online say that's a direct sort of homage to Paul McCartney, and he's been mentioned a few times. Is that song about Paul McCartney?
it's about Paul Fishkin.
Paul Fishkin,
Okay.
right?
Who's Paul Fishkin?
Yeah. Paul Fishkin was Woody's Truck Stops manager. Then he and Todd went on. I think he ran a lot of Todd's Bearsville business for a long time.
Yeah.
I know I don't know if he actually married her, but he was a couple with Stevie Nicks for a long time. Yeah, Paul, he's still around,
Yeah.
but that's who it's about. He was
I
a
don't think
big,
that has nothing to
he
do
was
with
a-
McCartney, but it did come out right around the same time that it came out on that second record. So
and it's got, you know, a lot of those very derivative from Beatles songs, little gimmicks in it,
Yeah.
vocals and guitar.
Now, from the third album, which was, as you said, a lot of outtakes and whatnot, and I understand that maybe some of the stuff you're like, oh, we could have done this better, whatnot. But there are some good songs there. I think "Some People" is a terrific song too. That it has. I could imagine that in 1970. What is it? There was a Sly and the Family Stone song about people and of different colors. Now, you don't mention people ethnically here, but you're talking about different types of people and personalities here. Only One Winner is another really, I think, very good song, and probably the song that maybe the hardest rocking songs you guys ever did, if it wasn't Under the Ice, is Magic Me, which is a really bluesy, ferocious song. So anything you want to add about those three songs or any of the other songs that I haven't mentioned? Yeah, Thom, if you want to go first, and then Stewkey.
Go ahead, Thom.
I think they were, they were all good songs. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on there that was never meant to be a record. The Todd's new package from Purple Nile or whatever it is, acetate thing. They sort of claim that our version of that Archie's song is really, I don't know what they said about it, but of course there was a Texas song by Archie Bell and the Drells called Tighten Up. We were just goofing off. We were warming up. We used it to warm up with in the studio, and there was a lot of stuff there that shouldn't have been on a record. Except maybe if it was just advertised as a outtakes and goof offs and gimmicks record. Kicks is not a song we ever intended to record.
And that's a really good version. I mean, I really think, I mean, the harder edge, the deeper, as I said in the earlier show, the deeper undertow, that I think really makes that song, to me, stand out more than the Raiders version.
Listen to it. When you get to the breakdown in the middle, we're all yelling at each other in Spanish. I mean, it was all meant to be a joke. The people at Screen Gems came to us because they
didn't want to do it.
They were primarily a publishing company, and they owned a lot of all those songs that were bubblegummy kind of songs. And they came to us and said, "We're doing an anti-drug record, and we would like all of our artists to contribute something to it." And it was like we weren't allowed to say no to that. We had to do something. We did it in about half an hour, and there was no discussion about it or anything. We just sat down and said, "Okay, blah blah blah." We just did it, but that wasn't ever intended to be something on a record of ours either. And a lot of the other ones are just unfinished.
Yeah,
they're good, and they were, I think, had we had more time and had we been planning it as a third record, they would have been finished and would have been better recorded. But we ran out of time and we ran out of money to keep recording them, and so they were just sitting there, and that's a good thing. I like Magic Me. Meridian Leeward, I just love that one. That was a real challenge to play. I was doing things on the drums there I can't do now. Coordination of stuff.
Well, look, I want to thank both of you for spending almost 2.5 hours now speaking with me, and I wanted to do this show, and I want you both to know, like I said, for 50 plus years, I hadn't even heard any of the Open My Eyes, which is the most well recognized song of you guys, and when I heard it again, it moved me to listen to the rest of your guys' catalog, and I think I tell young writers and young artists, and I've been in the arts world for 40 years, that excellence, greatness, these are things you have to have. The quality, you have to have enough of good quality that it's not just a dart toss accident, and then you have to be diverse and not just repeat yourself, not just pump out the same shit song after song, or story after story, book after book. And I think you guys are one of the great big question marks in the history of rock music, because I think your 2 actual albums, and if throw in a handful of the songs from the third ones that are I think really good too. You moved me, and your art moved me, and I want to do the show that people who don't know or haven't heard of the Nazz could also find your stuff. And maybe it's only going to be a few hundred more people that are out there. But I wanted to thank you for your contributions to that band and to pop culture. And so thank you both for spending this time speaking with me.
You're welcome.
Okay.
And thank you for being interested.
Okay. So
yeah, it's really weird. When we did that thing in 2019, and I had to try to remember how to play those songs, I didn't even have a copy of the records to listen to. I had to call all my friends up here and see if I could borrow a copy.
Well, anyway,
And
thank
then
you.
I had to join a band just to have an opportunity to rehearse them. But yeah, it's been a long time. That's all. And we both. I mean, I love that. That was vital. That was a wonderful time.
Well, again,
it's hard to find that.
Thank you both.